Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I wanted to go ahead and break down the 2023 NBA free agency class. I'm dropping this video on Wednesday, and free agency begins in just a couple of days on Friday. I believe at 6 p.m. Eastern is when teams and players can start negotiating, and we're going to get a bunch of deals the second that window hits. I'm also going to be live streaming most likely during that period, probably starting about 15 minutes beforehand, so definitely make sure to look out for that if you want some of my live reactions to some of the biggest deals, and of course I'll also make videos recapping the biggest signings and the biggest player movement moments. It's an interesting class. There's not a lot of superstar like top 10 talents, but there's a lot of guys that are big contributors to winning. All-stars, fringe all-star type players, young players that especially are in the restricted free agency market that I could legitimately see moving, and a ton of championship level role players that could move from spot to spot. It's going to be a really fun class, even if there aren't those massive blockbuster names that could be moved. And of course, in the background, while all of this is going on, there's a lot of question marks for a number of teams in terms of trades. We could see some big names get dealt if free agency doesn't go a squad's way. So it's a really important time of the year, as it is always. And the way I want to break this down is beginning by talking about the guards, the forwards, and then the bigs in this free agency class. I'm going to talk about the restricted free agents for each position set at the end of that section. So yeah, I'm just going to go through, make a few predictions here and there, talk a bit about some of the rumors that we've heard and potential destinations for some of the biggest name guys. That's kind of it. So make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Go ahead and comment down below some of your bold predictions for this free agency class, and where do you think some of the biggest names are going to land, as well as some of the names on here that you'd like to see your favorite team land. Like I said, we're going to begin with the guards of this class, and I think there are two names that kind of have separated themselves from the others. There's James Harden and Kyrie Irving. With Kyrie, to be honest, I think he's probably just going to go back to the Dallas Mavericks. I would genuinely be shocked if he wasn't playing alongside Luka in Dallas this upcoming season. It just doesn't feel like there's really any realistic destinations for him because cap space is pretty limited across the league. Like, the teams that have available space aren't the championship contending squads or the teams that are in the thick of the playoff hunt. It's mostly rebuilding teams. It's young teams on the rise that are going to have to pay some of their guys big time extensions this offseason. And Kyrie's best chance to win a championship at this point, and also to get a large sum of cash, is in Dallas. So I'd be stunned if he left. Plus, there was all the rumors that he was trying to recruit LeBron James over to Dallas as well. I don't think he would have done that if he wasn't going to stay himself, or at least was strongly considering it. I think he's going to be there when free agency wraps. Then there's James Harden, who's a bit more of a question mark. There have been two destinations that have really circulated all throughout this process, and really since like Christmas, it feels like we've been hearing the rumors about maybe him going back to Houston, or, you know, just staying in Philadelphia. If you ask me, I've become more and more confident that I think James Harden does go back to the Sixers. It presents the best opportunity for him to try and win a championship at this point. He's playing alongside literally the MVP this past season in Joel Embiid. He's got a great relationship with Daryl Morey as far as we know. He also was not a big fan of Doc Rivers, and it seems like he played a role in him getting fired. They brought a new head coach in Nick Nurse, and the rumors are that he's intrigued by what Nick Nurse has to offer for that team and his vision for the way the Sixers can play. It's a really good squad. I know a lot of people are going to continue to call the Sixers choke artists and this and that, but it easily presents his best opportunity to win a championship at this point in his career. Him going back to Houston has never really made sense to me, at least in terms of basketball. If he just wants to go home and be where he spent most of his career in Houston, it makes a lot of sense. And it would be fun to watch him play alongside those young guys, but he's not going to win a title there anytime soon, probably not in his entire career if he goes back to Houston. I also just don't think it makes much sense for the Rockets to spend all their cap space on a veteran point guard when they just added Amin Thompson in the draft and they've got Jalen Green next to him. I think you develop that young backcourt, see what they can do, and just keep building this thing going forward as one of the most intriguing young cores in the league. Now, there still is a chance that Harden does end up in Houston, but if I had to guess, I think he goes back to Philly on a pretty sizable deal. In a tier right below those two guys is Fred VanVleet, who was an All-Star just a season ago. Now, it was kind of a down year for Fred VanVleet. He was a bit up and down. He started the season really rough and picked it up towards the end, showcasing what, again, made him an all-star last season. But he is a smaller guard. He's getting up there in age. He's right around 30 at the moment, and he's probably going to be asking for a lot of money. So I'm not sure how big the market is for him. We've heard some rumors. In fact, the Rockets, who were just talking about with James Harden, as it seems more and more likely that James could end up returning to Philly, Houston has kind of emerged as a lot of people's leading candidate to steal Fred VanVleet away from the Raptors, bringing in a point guard through another avenue to add some veteran presence to that team. And I have the same reservations about adding Fred VanVleet as I do James Harden. I know you've got a bunch of cap space and you've got to spend it somewhere, but I think there are better avenues to utilize that cap space than Fred VanVleet, who again is a smaller guard that's up there in age, and I just don't know how good he's going to be. I don't know if he's worth a 4-year, like $120+ million contract at this point. There's also, of course, the Raptors, who are in that bit of a limbo state where we don't know if they're going to start this thing over, if they're going to go ahead and just run it back with Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Siakam, all the guys on that roster. If you've been on the channel for a little bit, you probably know that my opinion on Toronto is that they should begin this thing anew. They should trade Pascal Siakam. They should move on from Fred VanVleet, whether that's letting him walk or trying to negotiate a sign and trade, which is another avenue for Fred VanVleet to end up on a high-level roster, you know, instead of going to a team like the Rockets, who do have a bit more work to get up to a playoff type team. So we'll see what ends up happening with Freddie. He's one of the more intriguing pieces on the market because while at the beginning of the offseason, I felt pretty confident in saying he wasn't going to go back to Toronto, with not much of a market seemingly materializing, I think it's more likely that he does go there, although a lot of the experts are saying that he's Houston bound. Another guard that's in a bit of a weird position is D'Angelo Russell. He was traded to the Lakers at this past year's trade deadline and was pretty good for them for the most part throughout his tenure over the course of this last half of the season, but it was very up and down. There were some moments in the playoffs where he was really good, but if the shot wasn't falling, the defense is not great with D'Angelo Russell really ever. He became unplayable at times. He got benched towards the end of the Lakers playoff run and probably was one of the biggest monetary losers in this entire season. D'Lo seemed poised for a really big contract, but now we don't really know how much he's worth or how much he's actually going to get. I do think he probably ends up going back to the Lakers, according to Rob Pelinka, and really all the signs that we've gotten have been that the Lakers want to bring back most of the core that they had this past season. They were really good. They made a run to the Western Conference Finals, and although they got swept, I think with maybe LeBron being a bit healthier, some more cohesion with that roster, and some upgrades here and there, I think the Lakers could again be one of the best teams in the West, so it makes sense to just bring D'Lo back, and if he's not great throughout the season, you could probably flip him alongside maybe like a 2029 or 2030 draft pick to try and upgrade at that position if you have to. I don't think the Lakers should be in a rush to bring in a star caliber point guard to mess up what they have going on. I think you can kind of feel it out throughout the season, and so I expect D'Lo to probably be back. There is some potential for him to go somewhere else in a sign and trade, or maybe he just walks entirely, not really happy with the offer that the Lakers give him, but I do think that D'Lo is probably going to be in purple and gold at least to start this upcoming year. Next, let's talk about Jordan Clarkson, who, as I'm recording this video, still has his player option that he could end up accepting, and he'll never enter free agency at all, but I'm anticipating Clarkson probably denying that option and seeking a longer term deal, or just seeing how much money he can get on the open market before maybe just going back to Utah, where he's been pretty successful over the past few years. But I do think there's a realistic chance that someone steals him away if they offer him a lot of money. He's going to be a player that's heavily sought after by a lot of teams towards the top of their conferences, because adding a just straight up bucket like Jordan Clarkson would probably be a big boost to a lot of great teams' benches. Speaking of high-level role players that are going to be really sought after, we've got Bruce Brown, who's entering the open market after declining his player option with the Denver Nuggets, and he's going to be basically every contender's dream player to pick up in this offseason. I still think there's a good chance he goes back to the Nuggets, because while they can't offer him the most money, they could offer him a 1-year deal for around, I believe it's like $7.8 million, and then in the years following, they can offer him a much bigger contract. So maybe he goes back to the team and they promise him that, hey, in these next coming seasons, we'll give you that big time bag. But at the same time, I think there's also a pretty significant chance that he goes somewhere else and pursues that bag fresh off a championship run where he was a really integral piece to their success. There's going to be a number of teams that try and steal him away from Denver and offer him a lot of money. It's just a question of, would he rather go back to the reigning champs, or does he want to go get that money, which he's absolutely earned? Meanwhile, fresh off a finals run in Miami, both Max Strus and Gabe Vincent are unrestricted free agents. Teams are going to offer them a lot of money, and I feel pretty good about saying that Gabe Vincent will end up back in Miami. He seems like a bit of a priority after starting at point guard for them pretty much their entire finals run, but Max Strus, I think, is a bit more of a question mark. Now, he was really solid in the time that he started for them throughout that finals run too, but he was a bit more inconsistent, particularly in the finals. finals, he really could not knock down a shot, which they desperately could have used his offense. So maybe he ends up going somewhere else where the Heat just aren't willing to offer him as much money. But apparently there's widespread interest to sign Max Strus for a number of teams' mid-level exceptions. And I do think he could provide a really solid shooting punch for basically any team out there. To round out the free agent guards, we've got Caris LeVert, who I expect Cleveland to probably bring back. He said after the season that he wants to be back there. Cleveland, despite kind of bowing out early in the playoffs, was really good this past season. So I imagine they try and keep as much of their core together, and keeping a guy like LeVert around, even though he's inconsistent, just ends up making sense. You've also got Dante DiVincenzo, who was part of the Warriors this past season. He declined his player option, and I expect a number of teams to pursue him. The Knicks are the first squad to pop up in rumors as potentially looking to acquire him. You've got Lonnie Walker IV, as well as Dennis Schroeder from the Lakers this past season. I think both of them could very well be Lakers again, but after Lonnie Walker had a big bounce back from not playing much at the beginning of the playoffs to being an important piece of their team, maybe he goes and seeks a payday elsewhere, and maybe the same with Dennis Schroeder, although I think it makes sense for both sides to have a reunion. Seth Curry is also a free agent with the Brooklyn Nets. They could very well bring him back for a shooting touch, but being a 40% three-point shooter basically every season, even if the defense is rough, I think it makes sense for a number of other teams to try and pursue him as well, potentially with a mid-level exception. Starting off the restricted guards, we've got Austin Reeves, who went from being an undrafted guy that seemed like he could play a significant role in the Lakers potentially at some point down the line to being one of their best players this past season. I would say pretty comfortably their third best player behind LeBron James and Anthony Davis this entire year. He just kind of blossomed over there. He was a great connector, a really solid ball handler. His scoring rose. His ability to draw free throws was out of this world for a bit. The defense was solid. And the Lakers are just going to bring him back. All the rumors are that regardless of what an opposing team offers Austin Reeves in restricted free agency, they're going to do whatever they can to bring him back into the purple and gold. Apparently, even if he gets the max offer of about 4 years, $100 million, that's $25 million per year, the Lakers are still going to match that. So I don't think Austin Reeves is going anywhere, and I think that makes perfect sense. You got a young player, and you don't have a lot of young talent on your roster. You've got to do whatever you can to bring him back. Not only is he still really young and has a ton of potential to get better, but he's also just straight up one of your best players right now as you still try to continue to contend around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Two other guards that are restricted are Kobe White and Trey Jones. I think the Bulls probably try to bring back Kobe White after he had a pretty solid season this past year, especially with all the mystery surrounding Lonzo Ball, where apparently he's probably not going to play this upcoming season. Get well soon, Lonzo. And Trey Jones for the Spurs, I think they also probably bring him back. Just be a really solid point guard over there in San Antonio alongside Victor Wembanyama and the rest of that young core. I feel like he'll probably end up back there as well. With the guards wrapped, let's now go ahead and move over to the forwards. Let's begin with Chris Middleton, who feels like he'll probably go back to the Bucks. He won a title there. He has a great relationship with Giannis and probably the rest of that team. They even consulted Chris Middleton when deciding on their new head coach, Adrian Griffin. So it feels like he's been looped into the process, and I'd imagine Chris probably just gets a bag to remain in Milwaukee. But at the same time, I don't think it's a guarantee. While it is by far the most likely outcome, there are a number of teams out there with a bunch of cap space that could offer maybe a bigger role and also a really hefty payday. Although, again, I think he probably just ends up back with the Bucks. There's also Draymond Green, who's now out there on the unrestricted free agency market for, I believe, the first time in his entire career. And he was really solid this past year. Obviously, he's not as good as he once was, but he's still an elite defender, a great connector as a playmaker. The scoring is never going to be great with Draymond, but it was fine this past season. And I think there are going to be a lot of teams that are vying to bring him in. One team in particular that I could really see making a run for him is the Sacramento Kings, who were able to clear up a lot of cap space with their draft day trade of Rashawn Holmes. Harrison Barnes could also end up walking in this scenario, who's someone we'll talk about in a bit, and maybe they try and bring in a high-level defender who connects their offense like Draymond Green. I think he would thrive really, really well over there in Sacramento. He'd be a perfect fit for their system. They've got shooters to put around him, and the playmaking of him and Sabonis at your 4 and your 5 spots is going to be basically unmatched in the entire league. Houston is also, again, with their surplus of cap space, interested in bringing in Draymond Green to bring in some defense to that roster with new head coach Ime Udoka, highlighting that as a specific area of need, which is a surprise to nobody. I think Draymond, again, probably goes back to Golden State, but I wouldn't be surprised if he walked. I think this is one of the biggest names that I could realistically see moving spots in this offseason. Maybe Draymond has heard the rumblings over the course of his career that he's a system player, that he couldn't do it in another location without Steph, Klay, Steve Kerr. Maybe he decides to spread his wings and try somewhere else, help another squad raise themselves up. And I really think if the Warriors lose Draymond, it's a almost insurmountable blow to what they've had built over there. So this is a really critical offseason for both him and the Warriors. I do think trading Jordan Poole away after the two of them's altercation very visibly altered the play of the Golden State team this past season. I mean, Steve Kerr even noted that. I think that's a sign that they're going to really try to bring back Draymond. And I think it was Mark Stein who reported that they feel confident that they can do so. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up walking. One of the more interesting forwards on the market is Kyle Kuzma, who probably isn't going to return to the Washington Wizards. They're starting this rebuild over there. It doesn't make sense to go ahead and give Kuzma a long-term, like $25–30 million deal, which it's reported that he's actually seeking. So I think they'll probably just end up letting him walk, but they probably will get some assets back in a potential signing trade. There's rumors that he wanted to go to Phoenix, but with the Bradley Beal trade going down, I don't know how likely that is anymore. There's also just some talks of him wanting to go to more of a competitive team, maybe not necessarily a championship contender, but someone who's going to be firmly in the playoffs rather than the Wizards who are beginning this rebuild. So those teams really don't have that much cap space typically. I'd expect a sign and trade to happen with Kuzma. I'm not really sure where he's going to go. I know some Lakers fans want him back in Los Angeles, but it feels like to me they're probably just going to keep most of their core together if they can. So I'm pretty unsure about where Kuz is going to end up, but I do think he's kind of gotten underrated by some people. He was so good for the Wizards this past season and could be one of the biggest steals on this entire market. Another forward who I expect a lot of teams to pursue on this market is Jeremy Grant. He was really good for the Blazers this past season, and I think all the rumors are pretty much pointing to him signing a 4-year, $120 million contract to remain as a Blazer, especially if they're committed to getting Damian Lillard to stay and running this thing back around him. But I do think there are some squads that could feasibly steal him away. The Kings, again, I want to mention, having all that cap space, are an intriguing fit for Jeremy Grant, who I think would slot in perfectly at that 4 spot, replacing Harrison Barnes, who would likely in that situation go somewhere else. But I do think, again, if the Blazers are trying to build around Damian Lillard, Jeremy Grant probably remains a Blazer unless a sign and trade opportunity opens itself up for them to significantly upgrade the roster. Speaking of Harrison Barnes, while it seems possible that he remains a Sacramento King, with the surplus of cap space that they've opened up, it seems like they're going after bigger fish, and so I think there's a real chance that Harrison Barnes is on another team when opening day does roll around. The Pacers are apparently rumored to be really interested in bringing him in, and I like that fit. I like the idea of bringing that veteran type of guy because you probably could get him for a cheaper amount of money. You bring him in, provide some shooting, some defense, a bit of a do-it-all type of guy at the 3-4 spot. I like the idea of bringing Harrison Barnes a lot for the Pacers, and if the Kings strike out with the rest of the big names out there, I think they could very well bring him back and he could still play a super solid role over there. Then there's the highly polarizing Dillon Brooks, who the Grizzlies have already said that they're not going to bring back under any circumstance. So there's no way he's a Memphis Grizzly again unless something insane happens. And it seems like basically everybody has decided that he's probably going to end up a Houston Rocket, which does make sense. Again, Ime Udoka has said that he wants to bring in more of a defensive identity to the team. And while Dillon Brooks' shot selection and some of his antics are a bit frustrating, the defense is very real. I mean, he is a great defender. He's going to provide hustle, some grit to that Houston team that has been a bit wishy-washy in that regard the past few seasons. I think Dillon Brooks would add some legitimate value over there if they could get him for not a ton of money. Another impact forward that could be on the market is Josh Hart. I don't know if he's going to, though. Apparently him and the Knicks extended the deadline to decide what he wants to do with his player option until midnight on Thursday, and that seems like a good sign that he'll probably end up picking it up. I'm sure the Knicks are going to work something out with him, and if he does pick that up, he'd be eligible for like a 4-year, $80-some million contract extension at some point soon. So I think Josh Hart probably just does that. The Knicks were really good when they brought him in this past season. And again, I mentioned Dante DiVincenzo earlier as a potential name to bring to the Knicks, and the reason why that name has popped up is because of the Villanova connection between him, Brunson, and Josh Hart, who it seems like is probably staying. Some other intriguing forwards on the market include Kelly Oubre Jr., who just averaged over 20 points per game for Charlotte. He's indicated that he wants to be back, but with the Hornets having Gordon Hayward on the books, just drafting Brandon Miller, and it's seeming like there could potentially be a Miles Bridges reunion over there in Charlotte as well. It feels like he might be the odd man out, and I think a number of teams could look to bring him in. Jalen McDaniels was solid in his time as a Sixer after being traded by the Hornets. They might end up bringing him back, but I do think he provides some interesting versatility for a number of teams that are looking to add a guy to their roster. Speaking of the Sixers, they've also got Georges Niang as a free agent, a sharpshooting 4. He's getting a bit older, so maybe they end up letting him walk, but I do think his spacing is pretty solid for a team surrounded by Embiid. You've also got guys like Torrey Craig, who was solid for the Suns this past year, and I think they'll probably look to try and retain on a low-level contract if they can, because they desperately need people to just play basketball over there at the moment. Yuta Watanabe was one of the best three-point shooters in the league this upcoming season. Another guy that I feel like the Suns Suns could potentially take a look at, as well as a number of other squads looking for him on maybe a minimum type of deal. And also, for some reason, in this forward section, I've got Patrick Beverley and Josh Richardson listed here. Pat Bev is going to bring some defensive tenacity to wherever he signs. It doesn't seem like he's going to be back in Chicago. It seems like he's kind of indicated that he wants to go somewhere else, and I think any number of teams could look to bring him in as a bench guard. Meanwhile, Josh Richardson is a really interesting value wing that I think teams could probably pick up for pretty cheap. To round out the forwards, let's now go ahead and talk a bit about the restricted free agents. It all begins with Cam Johnson, who was great for the Nets after the deadline this past season, and according to all reports, they're going to do whatever they can to try and keep him in Brooklyn. But I do think there's a possibility that he could end up walking if, say, the Detroit Pistons, who are rumored to be writing a massive offer for him, send him like a 4-year, $100 million contract. Maybe the Nets aren't willing to pay quite that much. I don't think that's terrible value for Cam Johnson, who's young, the cap is spiking, and he plays a great role on basically whatever team he's on, but it is somewhat steep. I still expect the Nets to probably match that, so I think he'll end up there, but it could get interesting if the Pistons do throw him that much money. Another player that's due for a decently sized payday is Rui Hachimura, who was great for the Lakers in the playoffs this past season. I think they probably end up paying him whatever he wants because he was so good for them, and again, they don't have a surplus of young talent over there, so similar to Austin Reeves, I expect them to match whatever contract is thrown his way, especially because I don't think Rui is going to be offered like $100 million like Austin Reeves might, and I think the Lakers should do whatever they can to keep him there. I think they will, and he's going to be another really important piece to what the Lakers are trying to build. Meanwhile, a player that I think is basically guaranteed to leave is Grant Williams. It seemed like he was kind of already on the outs, not playing a ton over the course of the Celtics playoff run, especially early on. He got into the rotation a bit later, but it seems like he doesn't have a concrete role over there in Boston, and now with the new addition of Kristaps Porzingis, it seems pretty much impossible that they end up bringing back Grant Williams, especially with the new CBA really limiting the amount that you can pay players into the luxury tax. I think a number of teams are going to be interested in Grant Williams, especially in sign and trade scenarios. The Mavericks are rumored to be really intrigued by the possibility of adding him. I think the Sacramento Kings could also really look into bringing in a guy like Grant Williams, who, again, if they strike out on some of those bigger names that we mentioned before, I think could also fill a pretty important piece over there at that 4 position. So Grant's probably going to be somewhere else, and I do think he could contribute in a number of places. Finally, we've got PJ Washington of the Charlotte Hornets, who I think could provide a lot of value to a number of different teams. Again, I'm going to bring up the Pistons as a potential team. If, say, they strike out on Cam Johnson, who might be their #1 target, I could really see them pivoting over to a guy like PJ Washington, who would provide some spacing in that front court. Same with the Sacramento Kings. Again, if they strike out on some big names, I could see them trying to use their cap space to bring in a guy like him, who could play a really solid role over there. Maybe a team like the San Antonio Spurs, who just want to bring in young talent alongside Vic and the rest of the guys, could bring him in as well, just throw him some money. I think PJ Washington can go to a number of places, and I think wherever he goes, hopefully he's able to spread his wings, and people realize how good he actually is. Finally, we're here at the center spot, and to begin everything, we're going to talk about Brook Lopez. It felt like all throughout the season, it was a no-brainer that Brook would end up back over there in Milwaukee, but after the abrupt end to their season where they lost in the first round, and all the rumors that Houston is willing to throw him an absolute bag in free agency, it seems almost 50-50 now whether he leaves the Bucks and goes over to Houston pursuing that payday, or if he just stays in Milwaukee where he's had the most successful stretch of his career. If I had to predict, I would say he probably doesn't leave that situation because the Bucks will pay him probably a similar amount of money and offer him a way better chance at winning. But if the Rockets throw him that bag and say, hey, just come be the defensive leader for this young team, maybe he decides to go that way. Again, he just fits that identity of these high-level defensive players that it seems like Ime Udoka is trying to bring into Houston. Following him, we've got Christian Wood, who it seems like is pretty likely to leave the Dallas Mavericks after having a really inconsistent role this past season. They missed the playoffs. I just don't expect either side to pursue a reunion, especially because the Mavericks brought in Rashawn Holmes at the draft to seemingly fill that center spot. So I think Christian Wood goes somewhere else, and I think the most likely outcome for him is probably a sign and trade of some type to bring back some assets to Dallas, so he can probably go to a more competitive team. I don't know what that means. I don't know where he ends up. Maybe he's not getting a lot of interest. I'm curious because it feels like Christian Wood could theoretically get a decent payday, but at the same time, because his role was so inconsistent and there are concerns with the defense, maybe he doesn't get that much money. Maybe it's just like a mid-level exception. Maybe he takes a pay cut to play on a contending type of team. I really don't know. Christian Wood is one of those guys that I've got no idea where he's going to end up, and we really haven't gotten that many rumors about where he could go. Probably the last big name on the list is Jakob Poeltl, who was traded to the Raptors at the deadline and was pretty good over there, getting back to where he began everything over there in Toronto. I think they probably just end up bringing back Jakob Poeltl on around like a $20 million-ish deal if I had to guess. He's really good, and maybe the Raptors end up trading him by the deadline because they decide to blow things up eventually, but for right now, with them seemingly committing to trying to run this thing back, I think Poeltl's just back in a Raptors uniform. To round out the list of notable free agents at the positions, we've got Dario Saric, who was pretty good for the Thunder in his short time there. I think he probably ends up getting a minimum deal somewhere. Trey Lyles is a great floor spacing big that I'm sure that the Kings are going to desperately try to bring back, but if a team offers him a decent enough payday, I could see him walking. Mason Plumlee played backup center for the Clippers the second half of the season, and I thought he was pretty good in that role, so maybe they try and bring him back over there unless there's a better option out there. Thomas Bryant really did not play much for the Denver Nuggets, but he's solid depth, so maybe they just end up bringing him back, or another team takes a chance on him after, again, he really just did not play much after he got traded from the Lakers. Really, the only significant big I found in the restricted free agency market is Paul Reed in this summer, and I think the Sixers probably just end up bringing him back because he's been a really solid backup for Embiid over the course of the past few years. He's not perfect, but he's a solid option, and they could probably just get him back for cheap. Hey y'all, Cone from the future here. Real quick, I want to shout out a couple more guys that I missed while going over my list the first time recording this video that I've now noticed as I'm editing. The first one is Russell Westbrook. I don't know how I missed my favorite player of all time while going through my list, but he was really good for the Clippers after he got their post-trade deadline last season. I think the Clippers are going to be very interested, and it seems like they'll probably just bring him back, but with how he played, I wouldn't be surprised if he got more interest elsewhere as well. Shake Milton is probably going to leave the Sixers after not having much opportunity this past year. He's shown a lot of flashes as a really solid shot-creating guard, and I think he could thrive in another destination. You've got Javon Carter, who's a great defensive guard off the bench for the Bucks for the past few years. I think there's a team out there that could maybe offer him a mid-level exception and provide a big boost off the bench. Dennis Smith Jr. really had a big resurgence this past year in Charlotte, particularly on the defensive end. He was really solid at the point of attack. I think a number of teams could look to bring him in to shore up their backcourt defense. Ayo Dosunmu had kind of a down second season after being really good as a rookie, stepping up as a second-round draft pick. He's restricted, so I think the Bulls ultimately just try and keep him, but I do think that interest is probably lower than it would have been if he was, say, a free agent after his rookie year. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a very interesting piece for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He played some really solid defense for them throughout the playoffs and got some starting nods. I expect that they're just going to go ahead and bring him back, but he is a young player that I think a team could go ahead and throw an offer sheet at to just see if they can unlock some of his potential. Cam Reddish has been really up and down over the course of his young career. A lot of people think he can still be really good in the right environment, but it hasn't worked in Atlanta, it hasn't worked in New York, and it really has not worked over there in Portland. Maybe they just end up keeping him as part of the young core that they're building. Also, a restricted free agent for the Blazers is Matisse Thybulle, who they picked up at the deadline. The defense is phenomenal. I mean, he's made an all-defensive team in the past, but the offense is just such an issue that how much is it actually worth having him out there on the court when he's such a liability on that end? I'm sure he'll end up somewhere if it's not Portland, but I'm just not sure how desperate Portland is to bring him back because of that issue. And finally, there's Kevin Love, who was pretty solid for the Heat in their finals run. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back as a floor spacer, or if a number of teams look to just bring him in to shore up their front court depth. So yeah, that's my preview of the 2023 NBA free agency, all encompassing with the rumors that I've heard, potential destinations, my predictions for a lot of these guys. Let me know what you thought about this type of video. I've been recording for like an hour now, so it's probably going to be pretty long. I'm not sure exactly how much I'm going to cut out of this. Also, there's a good chance that I missed some names in here, so if there's anybody I didn't talk about and you want to hear some of my thoughts, let me know down in the comment section below. I tried to get basically all the biggest names. Obviously, this isn't everybody. I just tried to get some of the most notable guys. I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these future videos. Again, be on the lookout for that potential free agency reaction live stream coming on Friday. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.